All right, so we're journeying through the book of Exodus, and this journey is a journey to discover God in some new perspectives, to learn how to hear God in some new ways. And so the story begins with, really with Joseph, but then jumps several hundred years later to when people didn't know Joseph. Joseph's descendants are living there, and this leader rises up named Moses. And we talked about how the fact that the people didn't really know God very much at all. They had lots of misunderstandings about God, a lot of confusion about him, and he hadn't really spoken to people as far as we know. We don't really have any idea that he was communicating very much with people except these huge stretches between like Abraham and then we have Moses. And so last week we were at the burning bush, and we talked about how God speaks to us, and he doesn't speak to us in burning bushes. That doesn't, at least hasn't happened to me, probably not to you. But God is still very clearly speaking to us, and so what we're trying to figure out is how he does that, when he does that, how we can clearly hear him more often and easily. And so Moses has this amazing encounter at the burning bush. We talked about that last week. And then following the burning bush, God has this really interesting interchange with Moses. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I hope you had time to read it. But it's just really amusing because here you have God who's trying to convince Moses that everything's okay and it's going to be fine. And he's going to lead him and it's going to be a great journey. And Moses is really, really sounds like he's pretty content where he is, just leading a few sheep and, raising some kids and living out there in the wilderness. And God said, no, you're going to go do this stuff. You should just send someone else. I'm the wrong guy. And so there's this huge, really amusing dialogue between God and Moses. And God's trying to convince Moses that it's going to be okay. And it sounds like God's even getting a little bit exasperated with Moses. And the first thing is that, Moses says, well, no one's going to believe that you sent me. And so God gives him these two signs. One is a stick that turns into a snake, and then he can put his hand in his coat and comes out and it looks like it's all diseased. He puts it back. It sounds like something you'd see at Las Vegas, doesn't it? He's like, what? Sticks and snakes and stuff? And why would they even believe that stuff? And so Moses, apparently they're significant. And then Moses says, well, yeah, that's good stuff, but I don't know how to talk. Well, what are you doing? You're talking to me. Yeah, but I can't talk to a lot of people. And so God's, oh my gosh, can't believe this guy. He said, all right, you've got a brother Aaron. He knows how to speak to people. I'll let him be your spokesperson. And so, there's this huge, long thing that happens. And then so finally, Moses, dragging his sandals, decides he's going to do it. And so meets Aaron, and they head off toward Egypt together with his family. He gets permission from his father-in-law. We talked about that last week a little bit. And a really bizarre thing happens on the way to Egypt. And it's between Zipporah, his wife, and God. And it's just sort of bizarre. And so then he gets there. And he tells the people that, I'm here from God. And, I imagine that they sort of have the same feeling that we would have if somebody walked in and said, hi, I'm here from God. And, but he shows him his, I don't want to call them magic tricks, but his signs, which seems like magic tricks. And they say, okay, well, I guess we'll see what happens. And then he goes and talks to Pharaoh, and then things really begin to fall apart. And Pharaoh is irritated, what's this? You want to go off in the wilderness and worship some God that I've never heard of? We've got lots of gods here. You can just simply worship our gods. And there's no reason to think that they haven't been worshiping those gods. In fact, I think they were. But this is a new God, something, just revealed to them or from their past, and they want to go away. And they just stay for 3 days, which is kind of a fascinating thing in itself because they're not really going for 3 days. They're going forever. But he tells them for 3 days. And then things, as I say, fall apart. And Moses says, you've got so much time in your hand, I'm not going to give you any straw to make bricks anymore. Now not only do you have to make bricks, but you have to go get the straw yourself. And so the Israelites are in forced labor. They've gotten a situation where they are a minority group in Egypt, and the oppressors are forcing them to do manual labor and to serve them and to be their slaves. And they have been providing them with straw to make bricks, but now they're not even doing that. So the Israelites not only have to make the bricks, but they have to go get the straw to put in the bricks, because without the straw, the bricks would not be strong. Okay. I think that it's very, very important that anytime we read anything in the Old Testament, that we remember the role of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came to clarify who the God of the Old Testament was. And I don't want to say that the people of the Old Testament, well, let me just say that they did. They had a lot of distorted ideas as to who God was. And it's very apparent from the very beginning in the book of Exodus that they had some very, very confusing ideas about who God was. And so Jesus comes, one of the primary roles that Jesus has is to be a litmus paper on what it means to say or to describe or to give attributes to the Creator God. Because there were so many misconceptions. And even to Jesus' day, he came and he started taking apart a lot of their misconceptions. And he started speaking a lot of their misconceptions. So what I want you to remember is every time you read something in the Old Testament and they're talking about God and they're making descriptions about God and they're speaking about God, you need to evaluate those passages in light of what Jesus said. Because Jesus is the litmus paper. And they said that. They honestly said that. But is it a perfectly clear, accurate representation of God? Well, in one sense, there is no such thing as a perfectly clear, accurate representation of God, because God is so far beyond anything we can possibly comprehend. So anytime a human starts trying to imagine God, there's going to be some misunderstanding, some error that's going to creep in. And so Jesus is the litmus paper for that. Now, here we are some 2,000 years later, and I think it's very easy for us to think, well, those people in Egypt, they were really primitive, they were ignorant, they were not enlightened, but we are. Here we are, 2,000 years after Jesus. We've been studying the Bible for hundreds of years. I won't say thousands because we've only had it for a few hundred years. And so we are enlightened. We have perfect understanding of who God is. I am becoming convinced more and more that we have more and more and larger distorted ideas about who God truly is. And we talk about this shift that's happening in the Christian church around the world, and how there's this movement away from churches from a lot of people, and there's people that are becoming disenchanted. And my suspicion is that a lot of that is rooted in the fact that we have distorted ideas about who God truly is. There are people that have grown up in the church that have given up all hope and faith in God. And I suspect that the reason that that's true is because what they have been taught their whole life is a distortion of who God truly is in some senses. And I think, like the Israelites, that there are some things about God that we need to relook at. That we need to say, really, is this really who the God, the Creator is? Is this who truly Jesus is representing? Is this really accurate? What I've been noticing is, as I listen to hymns, I listen to choruses, and we use some verbiage that is really Egyptian. We use some words, we use some phrases which really reflect how the Egyptians viewed their gods. It is not at all the way that Jesus represents God. When we got home last week, we were talking about the events, and Jean said, you said this in your prayer last Sunday. And I said, are you kidding me? I used those words? And she said, yeah. I'm not going to say what the words are because you'll fixate on them. But I thought, oh, wow. That's not how I view God at all anymore. And so we have just gotten so used to using certain verbs, certain words, certain ways of looking at God that it's just become part of who we are. And so we just have this natural assumption that we have it clear and correct. And what I want you to do, and this, I don't want any of you to feel threatened or nervous, but I want us all to begin to take a fresh look at who the Creator God is. I want us to look at this and say, these guys were really, really confused when Moses first came to them. They had no idea who the Creator God was. They had all sorts of distorted, strange ideas about who the Creator God was. And God is taking them on this journey to introduce them to Himself. And I want us to enter into that journey in the same way. I want us to say, God, I don't want to be afraid of anything about you. I want to know you so completely, so intimately. Let me just tell you one thing about God that I'm coming to understand, is that we have a very separatist view of God. We think of God out there somewhere. Do you know that God is all through this music stand? Do you know that there's enough energy in a rock to power everything on this planet? If you go down to an atomic level, there's this incredible amount of energy happening at every single instance. You see, that's what I believe is the existence of God. I think that God permeates every single thing. But we talk about God as something that we need to bring into our presence. But what I think we need to come to realize is that God is simply everywhere around us and through us. Every single atom of us is the existence of God. As we start to understand that and comprehend what that means, it completely changes our dialogue with Him. It completely changes how our understanding of how we hear Him, how He speaks to us, how we interact with the creation itself. Because every single thing is truly sacred. The other thing that is going to become very clear to us is that God's creation, God's relationship to creation to us is perhaps different than we imagined. And you sort of expect, that Moses, he has this incredible experience of God speaking to him out of a bush. So, his life is set. He knows his direction. He should have some purpose. He should have some understanding. Everything should go smooth from here on in. And he barely leaves that, and he has this weird, strange thing that happens between his wife and God. What does that all mean? He gets back to the people, and he tells them God's glorious plan for the life, and it just goes to the pits. Constant turmoil. So the journey with God, and I really appreciated what you shared about life under the anvil. The journey with God isn't a journey that life is just going to be blissful and pleasant every single step of the way. And I think that having that distorted idea has led a lot of people to become really disillusioned with even being followers of God, because they think, wow, this world's a mess. There can't possibly be a God, because they have a pagan idea as to who God is. And we've communicated that. The church has communicated part of that. Jesus said, my goal for you is to have an incredibly abundant life. My goal for you is to experience life and to live it to the full. Our theme was John 10:10. But you know what he also says is, in this life you will have tribulation. The book of James says, you're going to have tribulation, but know this. And the other thing is that you shouldn't imagine that this tribulation is coming from God. The tribulation is simply a part of creation itself. Creation is a creation of turmoil, and we are placed into that turmoil. But God says, out of that turmoil is where your hope will come. Out of that turmoil is where your relationship to myself will come. Out of that turmoil is where you will be molded and created to be something which you never even imagined possibly true. The great hope that we have in this life is the Creator. The great hope that we have in this life is that we have this incredible, intimate relationship with Him. That we have this ability to connect to the very force that made this all happen. So as we move forward, as we start to look at our lives, we start to think about the things that we believe about God, I want us all to simply challenge those things and to say, wow, is that really what Jesus represents? Is that really what I believe? Is that really helpful in this journey of hope moving forward? Stand with me and let me give you a benediction. Now may the wisdom of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Creator of the universe, flow into you to reignite your hope, your faith, and your trust, and give you new eyes to see God in a way you never have before. Amen.